June 21st, 1941. The night before the world tore itself apart. Deep within the forests of East Prussia, inside the concrete belly of the wolf's lair. The air was warm and dry, thick with the scent of expensive cigars and French brandy. Hundreds of miles away, on the misty border, 3 million German soldiers lay in the damp mud, cleaning their rifles, waiting for the signal flare that would ignite the horizon. Adolf Hitler stood before a massive operational map, tracing the vast expanse of the East with a trembling finger. A smirk played on his lips as he turned to his generals, men decorated with iron crosses and blinded by hubris. He uttered the sentence that would echo through history as a curse. We have only to kick in the door, and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down. This was a scientific conclusion believed by the entire German High Command. Colonel Kinzel, head of the intelligence division, had just submitted a report. It painted the Red Army as a disorganized mob decapitated by birches, communicating by shout, and transporting supplies by horse cart. But the most fatal line in that report was a number. The German intelligence experts, with absolute confidence, calculated the Soviet Union could field 5,000 tanks. And not just any tanks. They assured the Führer these were obsolete T-26 tin cans, vehicles so thinly armored that any German anti-tank gun could slice through. Remember that number 5,000, that was the math that convinced Germany to pull the trigger. They had gathered 3,500 of their own elite panzers. To them, destroying 5,000 Soviet yellow pies was to war. It was an armed parade. But fate was about to play the cruelest joke. The map was wrong. The data was wrong. They hadn't just miscalculated the enemy's strength, they had misidentified the species. When the sun rose and they kicked that door open, they didn't find a scared rabbit. They found a starving Siberian bear. June 22nd, 3:15 in the morning. The largest artillery barrage in human history tore the silos apart. The sky turned blood red. General Guderian's panzer groups shot into the Soviet heartland like black arrows. It seemed Hitler's prophecy was coming true. Soviet border units fell like wheat. Hundreds of thousands surrendered. German tank crews sat on their turrets, laughing. They were discussing dress uniforms for the victory parade. But the seeds of terror began to sprout just 48 hours later. Near a nameless town in Lithuania, a German panzer division, charging at full speed, suddenly slammed into a wall. Not a wall of concrete, but a single, solitary Soviet tank parked in the road. It was a monster they had never seen before. The KV-1 heavy tank. It sat there like a mobile fortress, its thick cannon staring coldly at the invaders. The German advance guard immediately opened fire. In France, these guns were killers. The German gunner watched the tracer round scream through the air, hitting the KV-1's front armor dead center. He waited for the explosion. Instead, he heard a sound that would haunt his nightmares clang. The shell bounced off. It ricocheted like a glass marble hitting a steel bolt, tumbling harmlessly into the grass. The Soviet tank didn't even shudder. Slowly, terrifyingly, the KV-1's turret began to rotate. It was the sound of the Grim Reaper turning his head. Boom. The cannon spat fire. A German Panzer III instantly dissolved into a ball of burning wreckage. This was only the beginning. If the KV-1 was a fortress, the T-Third Reich was a predator. German intelligence said Soviet tanks were slow and clumsy, but frontline crews watched in horror as T-Third Reich seconds tore across the muddy steppe. The T-Third Reich with their sloped armor was at the time alien technology. Imagine the despair of a German gunner in a panzer fort. The cabin smells of sweat. Your hands are shaking. You lock onto a charging T-34, you fire. Direct hit. But because of that slope, your shell slides off the steel skin. It flies into the sky. The Soviet tank just shakes off the dust and keeps coming. The radio screams with the panic of your comrades. We can't get through. Then the T-Third Reich crashes into your line. using its wide tracks to crush your wingman S-tank like a soda can. It ground steel into the mud. The proud German Panzer Corps, the conquerors of Europe, were suddenly reduced to prey. They gave their 37 anti-minus tank guns a new, bitter nickname Heiruslampskater, meaning the army door locker. Because all you could do was knock on the door and let the Soviets know you were waiting to die. The panic spread like a virus. It reached the high command. General Guderian, father of the Blitzkrieg, looked at the casualty reports with ice-minus cold hands. His commanders reported a terrifying fact: the enemy was infinite. For every tank destroyed, the enemy should have one less. But reality defied physics. For every tank the Germans blew up, the new ones seemed to materialize on the horizon. This was the second, and most fatal, mistake of German intelligence. They had measured a giant with a static ruler. They looked at the Soviet Union as an army, but they were fighting an industrial monster. German production was like watchmaking. They were hand-miners finishing gears, obsessing over precision, while the Soviet Union had turned war into a massive assembly line. East of the Ural Mountains, in places German maps labeled as uninhabited wastelands, thousands of civilians were working. Soviet women, children, and elderly civilians toiled in sub-0 temperatures, often without roofs over their heads. They did not care about comfort or polished edges. They only cared about three things: can it move? Can it shoot? Can it destroy the enemy? German intelligence estimated the Soviets could produce, at best, a few hundred tanks a month. Reality slapped them across the face. The Soviets were not producing hundreds, they were producing thousands of tanks. The Kharkov and Grad tractor plants were not making farm equipment anymore. They were nests birthing steel monsters. Some T-30 were driven straight out of the factory doors, paint still wet, without sights, steered by drivers without maps. They did not need a map because the battlefield was right outside the factory gate. The war had turned into a slaughter. You could be a German ace, destroying 20 T-30 with superior tactics, but when the 20-first came, ammo was gone. Your fuel was empty. Your spirit was broken. This wasn't combat, it was drowning in a tsunami of steel and Soviet rage. By October 1941, the Russian winter arrived to finish what the T-30 started. This was the final nail in the coffin. German precision engineering became a liability. Optical sights cracked in the cold. Synthetic oil turned into glue. Engines refused to start. German soldiers had to light fires under their own tanks just to fool the engines enough to turn over. Meanwhile, the T-30, a crude machine designed for this brutal environment, thrived. While the narrow miners track German panzers sank into the white powder, becoming helpless, frozen coffins, General Holder sat in his office. The chief of staff, who once arrogantly pointed at maps and claimed victory, was spiraling into depression. He wrote in his diary, "We have unknowingly struck a hydra. We estimated the enemy had 200 divisions. We have already identified 360. When we destroy a dozen, the Russians simply put another dozen in their place." That sentence is bone-minus chilling to read. It meant that 3 million young German men had been marched into the ice to die based on a clerical error. They were not fighting 5,000 obsolete tanks. They were facing a production run that would eventually total over 50,000 T-30%. As the German army reached the outskirts of Moscow, they could see the spires of the Kremlin through their binoculars. It was the prize they dreamed of, and the graveyard they would never leave. The frozen ground began to shake violently. But this time it wasn't German panzers attacking. It was the Siberian divisions launching their massive counter-minus offensive. Thousands of T-30, painted in winter white, burst out of the blizzard like ghosts, swarming over the frozen German lines. The elite panzer crews, now starving and freezing, abandoned their machines and ran. The backbone of the Wehrmacht snapped. It was broken not by strategy, but by the sheer, crushing weight of numbers they were told simply did not exist anywhere. Looking back, what killed the Third Reich? It wasn't just the winter. It wasn't just the T-34th, it was sheer arrogance. It was a cultural blindness. The Germans couldn't believe a subhuman race could build a tank superior to German engineer. They couldn't believe a chaotic communist system could out-produce German efficiency. They clung to their logic of elite war. They slammed head first into the wall of total war. That estimate of 5,000 tanks wasn't just a number on a piece of paper. It was a death warrant signed by Hitler and his generals. When Guderian wrote the appearance of the T-30 from Mark the end, he was admitting a darker truth. We lost the moment we underestimated them. The most terrifying thing in war isn't strength. It is your own ignorance. Hitler thought he was kicking in a rotten door, but the collapsing beams crushed his entire empire. So the next time you see a tank battle in a movie or a game, remember this real-life nightmare. Remember the German gunner. Remember him staring helplessly at a bouncing shell. Remember the green ocean of steel pouring out of the Urals to the west. This is the bloodiest lesson history has to offer. Never use your logic to define your enemy. Because the moment you think you know everything is the moment you have already lost. Did this story of steel chill your blood? If you want more hardcore breakdowns of history as deadliest miscalculations, smash that like button and subscribe right now. I am your strategy observer. I will see you on the next battlefield. Thank you for watching this historical